Number 1. Orchard. I never really enjoyed my visits to my relatives' houses after I was a teenager and then an adult. The reason behind it is that when I was a teenager, and the oldest of my cousins, who were mostly quite a bit younger than I was still treated like I was one of the younger kids. The last thing I wanted to do when I was 16 years old was go out and play with kids around the age of 11. And this continued into my late teens and early 20s. My grandma, aunts, and uncles would hang out, and because I wasn't married, they still acted like I was one of the younger kids. And they would still insist that I go out and play with the younger ones. I stopped visiting for a few years because I was tired of being treated like that. It wasn't until my late 20s that I decided to go and visit again. And when I did, it was when my mom went to visit. So I accompanied her on down there. I had one uncle who I didn't see a whole lot while I was growing up. He would travel around, looking for work or people to live with, along with his longtime girlfriend at the time. He was my Uncle Bill, and I always enjoyed being around him when I was younger. He wasn't as tightly wound as all of my other relatives. Of course, this meant that he often did a lot of drinking and a lot of drugs. He got fired from a lot of jobs, and even spent some time in jail. That, of course, made it harder for him to get good jobs going forward, and he would often work under the table jobs. Well, on this visit, a lot of my relatives were over at my grandma's house. Fortunately, because they had been missing seeing me, my relatives were not treating me like a kid anymore. Another one of my uncles wanted to take me over to his house and drink some whiskey with him, but his wife really didn't want that going on, so that didn't happen. But my Uncle Bill lived in this little shack out in the hills. He lived there for free with his wife, who was a different one than the one I was used to growing up. The shack was provided to him by a guy that he did work for in an orchard. He asked me if I wanted to come over and have a beer with him. His wife liked those flavored drinks like Smirnoff Twisters and things like that. I had never had a beer before, and I almost declined, but she told me I could share her drinks with her. So I went, and I had a few of those drinks. I also had a beer for the first time in my life. My uncle also had some weed to smoke. Now, I had done that before, but I didn't tell them that. He was happy I had my first beer with him. I had no problem having him think that I would have my first joint with him too. It was a really nice afternoon that moved on into evening. I was having a nice time, but also, all the drinking and the weed began having an effect on me, and I was beginning to get drowsy, feeling like I might pass out or fall asleep. When I woke up, it was to what sounded like a gunshot and a scream. I was still out of it, and it took me a few moments to figure out even where I was. When I did, I noticed that I was in a small shack by myself with my uncle's wife. My uncle was not in the building, but I could hear him yelling something at someone. Getting up, I went to look out the window. She tried to stop me, but I was curious. This little shack was up in the hills on a dirt road. It was right on the edge of an orchard. It was an odd setup because I never had seen an orchard out in the hills like that. Although it was beautiful, that was the orchard my uncle did work on, and he was standing on the edge of the orchard. That's when I saw lights coming from the orchard. There were a couple of them, and I figured that they had to be flashlights or something. When I saw them, I heard another gunshot. I realized then that the gunshots had been fired by my uncle. The lights retreated for a moment, and then they were out. When my uncle came back, I noticed that he was bleeding really badly. His wife helped him out, and my uncle explained to me what had happened. Apparently, while I was sleeping, the guys that had worked on the orchard and previously lived in the shack came back to harass him for taking their job. They had been kicked out by the owner of the orchard and had been occasionally tormenting my uncle and his wife. The shack didn't have any door on it, and they had gotten in, threatened my uncle and his wife while I was passed out. In the heat of the argument, they had cut my uncle with a knife. My relatives generally always had a rifle or shotgun in the house, so my uncle retrieved it and chased the guys out into the orchard. Despite the guys leaving, I felt very uncomfortable the rest of the time I was in the shack. It was scary, in the dark, in the hills, to be in a shack with no door on it, on the edge of a dense orchard, knowing that the people who attacked him could come back any time in the protection of the dark. We weren't there very long, though, before my other uncle showed up. He had heard the shots and came up to see what was going on. They took me back to my grandma's and my uncle to the hospital. The next time I visited, my uncle was not working in the orchard or living in the shack. I never found out what had happened with the two people who had attacked him. Number 2. The Stall. I've only had one really scary experience in my life, and to this day I cannot really explain it. I'll wait until the end of the story to tell you why, however. I don't want to give anything away too soon. When I was 16 years old, my family was going down to visit some family. I didn't want to go, for many reasons, mostly because I knew that if my family was away, my dad would leave the keys for the spare car, and then I could go and drive it around without any fear of getting caught. We lived in a beautiful area out in the country. We were only there for a couple years, and it was so long ago. I haven't lived in a place like that ever since. It was in a really hilly area. You had to drive out of town, through the rolling hills, into the higher hills that we lived in. And although you could look down on a lot of the lower hills in front, you couldn't do so much into the even higher hills behind and around us. Anyway, my family was out of town, and I decided to go driving around. I went into town and picked up a few friends. We did a few things together and hung out a bit into the night. However, my buddies had to get home and they all lived in town, so I decided to drive back to my area. Well, my last friend I took home lived a bit out of town too. I dropped him off last and then decided to go home. However, rather than driving back to town and then through the rolling hills, I thought I would take the back way around. I'd never been in that area and just thought my sense of direction would help me out. And although I didn't think I was lost, I did end up driving around in the higher hilly area for quite a bit. I had learned to drive on roads like this, so I was used to doing it. It was dark, and the road was narrow. And although I had driven on these sorts of roads to learn, it wasn't in the middle of the night that I had learned. The darkness was the scariest part of the whole thing. While I was going downhill, the car died. And when it did, it continued coasting down the hill, all the way to the bottom of it. I tried starting it then, but I realized that the battery was low. It was not uncommon for that to happen with that car, so I just decided to let it rest for a while before I tried again. It was scary sitting in the car. I locked the doors, which seemed silly too. It wasn't like I was in a dangerous urban area in the city where someone was going to break into my car. There were not a lot of houses out in this area, and the people who did live out there were generally pretty well-to-do people. But I was still at an age where I could occasionally be afraid of the dark, and I did let it get to me a little bit. Well, maybe about 40 minutes after I had stalled, I noticed some lights from behind me. A car or a truck pulled over the top of the hill, the one that I had just rolled down. The light from the headlights shone all over me, but rather than come all the way down the hill, the car stopped at the top of the hill. The light just shone on me. I couldn't figure out exactly why, except if I was blocking the way on the narrow road. But rather than just remaining at the top of the hill, I thought the car would come down the hill and ask me what was wrong. maybe they would be able to give me a jump. But rather than do anything like that, the car just remained at the top of the hill. The light just continued shining on me. After about 10 minutes, I was beginning to get very worked up. It just seemed like it was an extremely weird situation. I was about to try to start the car there again, but that's when I heard a door slam. And I thought finally maybe the driver was going to come down and check on me. But it took a few moments before I finally noticed someone standing in the light of the vehicle. And rather than walk down to see me, he just stood there in the light. The fear just kept building up over and over. The situation was weirder and weirder. Finally, I noticed the guy walking slowly down the hill. However, at the moment, I did not really want him to anymore. The situation was just too freaky by that point. It was then that I heard a revving noise. It seemed familiar, but I was not sure what it was when I had first heard it. After a few more revs, though, the motor started. The silhouette of the man then took a much more ominous shape. The man was holding a chainsaw, and he slowly kept walking toward me. I paused for just a moment. That moment didn't last long, as I decided to try the car for the first time. I will spare you the horror movie cliche, though. The car started on the first try, and when it did, I took off down the gravel road as quickly as I could. I drove really fast, and I didn't slow down until I got in our driveway. When I got out of the car, I looked down our long driveway and down the hill. I did not see a car or a truck coming in my direction. I went into the house and remained there all night. And I have no idea who that had been in the car with the chainsaw. I had no reason to believe it was anyone I knew or anyone who had anything against me. I mean, it was possible it was just some crazy mother who was going to hurt me just for blocking the road. There could have been a guy who was just trying to scare me for the sake of scaring me. If so, well, mission accomplished. Number 3. Hiking trip gone wrong. I cared for my mom, my only living relative, the last 6 years of her life. The last year and a half was 24-hour care. I'm not a nurse, but was trained to use the medical equipment she needed. Watching her fade away destroyed me. Her voice was so weak, I spent every day and night in a chair by her bed, so I'd know if she needed anything. While sitting, I often missed going into the wild for camping or kayaking down the river. I found myself alone and mentally lost after she passed. I lost almost half of my body weight in the last 6 months due to stress. And when she passed away, I was 86 pounds and weak as a kitten, totally exhausted. A month later, I tried to pick myself back up and tried doing one of the things I sat missing and daydreaming about for so long. I thought I wanted to go camping like old times, but the thought of rounding up all the gear was exhausting, so I decided to go for a nature walk instead. I thought just being in the great outdoors would perk me up. I packed a granola bar and a single serving cup of fruit cocktail to take with me because everything tastes better in the outdoors, and my appetite had been gone for months. I had bottles of water to carry. The trailhead was just behind my house, but I drove to save strength for the trail. I parked at the edge of the road, and knowing it's not wise to carry food, I ate in the truck. I also didn't have strength to carry more than the minimum necessities: water, cell phone, and bear spray. There are black bears, coyotes, mountain sheep, bobcats, and mountain lions, to name a few wild animals common to the area. People have even reported Bigfoot sightings. I waited months for this opportunity and wanted to enjoy it, but also reflect on the last few months and renew my zest for life. I started walking, noticing the plants, rocks, and singing birds. I was weak and unsteady on the steep trail, hoping to find a walking stick. I climbed down the ravine that sometimes had a stream flowing, but it was dry, so I started to climb up the other side and knew my energy level was nearly used up when I tried pulling myself up the large boulders. I had gone farther than expected and was pleased with the distance, about 1 mile. Walking back down, I realized how tired I was and sat on a tall flat rock to rest. I was still too far to see my truck around the bend. I appreciated nature for a few minutes and climbed down from the rock to get back on the trail. I continued down the trail thinking I'd do this again soon, maybe making this trek as part of my self-guided physical therapy routine. I recognized this couple of hours outside as the first peace I'd felt in many months. No pressure to hurry. The event I feared most had already happened, and now I had to figure out how to put my life back together. Lost in thought, I walked along. I never saw it or heard it coming. At first, I thought a man was attacking me. The weight slammed me to the ground face first. My phone was in my hand because I had been taking pictures, so I instinctively tried to smash him in the face, but I couldn't turn over because I was pinned down with one arm under me. My phone made contact. I felt a solid thump, and the grunt I heard was no man, and my phone was no longer in my hand. I assumed it was a bear. It took a few tries to pull the canister of bear spray from my belt, and it was hard to think clearly. I was consumed by fear. I attempted to press the button, but the safety guard was on, preventing it from spraying. I had to hit it and scrape it on the ground to get the guard off, and I only had one hand to work with. The animal was stronger than I was. I reached up and sprayed us both. Immediately it let go and ran into the brush, but I got a glimpse of a mountain lion. My eyes were full of dirt and burning bear spray. I couldn't catch my breath. I thought I might suffocate. I saw my phone and tried to call 911. No service, and the screen was broken. I got up and staggered down the hill. I was disorientated and stunned. I wanted to run, but common sense told me it might return to chase me, or another one might pounce. I could see my truck and walked as fast as I could, but every time I fell, I feared being pounced again. If I screamed, no one would hear. I had to get myself out of there and to the nearest hospital. I finally reached the safety of my truck. I was shaking so badly I struggled to unlock the door, but once I was inside, I locked the door, and it took several attempts to get the keys in the ignition. I bounced down the dirt road, and when I got to the highway, it was 42 miles to the hospital. I was driving badly, all over the road and speeding. Pain had just hit me. I pulled over in a tiny town near where I lived, afraid I'd pass out before reaching my destination. Panic, fear, pain, blood, loss. I don't know, but I was fading out. The town had a small clinic, so I went there. I tried to be nonchalant and asked if they accept walk-ins, not realizing I was covered in dirt and blood. My clothes were torn and I was about to barf. I couldn't grasp the reaction of the staff and waiting patients. I'm trying to be quiet and mellow, while everyone around me was freaking out. I was taken immediately to a room where I thought they'd patch me up and send me home with a bill. The sheriff was called, so were the Department of Wildlife Resources, the Department of Fish and Game, and the main hospital. My clothes were taken from me and bagged. I was photographed by each agency before any treatment was allowed. I made a wisecrack that I must be a nude model by now. Nobody laughed. I was glad someone approved that the wounds could finally be cleaned, and a bowl of soapy warm water was left near me, but they had to step outside of the room again for another powwow. I started cleaning myself up. I was shocked at what I was seeing. I could hear their entire conversation as they think, out of sight, out of earshot, but the statement that got to me was, "This is worse than the father and son from 2 weeks ago." They also agreed it was a bigger cat because of the distance of the claw marks. I was basically triaged at the clinic, and taken to the hospital. It was discovered in a CAT scan. There was more damage internally than externally. I had 2 intestinal hernias, left and right sides, as well as entangled and folded intestines. Also a bruised liver. The external scratches, scrapes, and bruises were treated. The cuts were stitched. The bites had DNA samples taken. I was in a world of pain, and then the staff wanted me to get a rabies shot. I heard those are extremely painful, and I was at my pain limit. I politely declined. They tried convincing me, and I protested. They got nasty with me, and I threw a fit. No more pain, I just want to go home. Going home wouldn't be that simple. I had no clothes, so the staff found some for me. I was requested not to talk to the media, bad for tourism. I wanted nothing to do with the media, but it didn't help that one of the clinic workers pounced on her Facebook and announced my incident. HIPAA, anyone? I had no vehicle, so the wildlife resources officer drove me, but not without returning to the location where the attack happened. He was obsessed with finding the hat that I was wearing, that it became lost, and for me to show him where I walked. I refused to get out of his vehicle. He assured me he was armed and I'd be safe. Nope, not going. He walked around for a few minutes while I waited. I was flooded with all the thoughts and feelings there wasn't time to process as it happened, so I was flooded with terrible emotions. The officer came back saying something about not finding the hat. I responded with anger. He probably has it hanging on his cave wall like humans do with their heads. I had reached my breaking point. I protested the hunters with their dogs, begging them not to kill the cat, that it was my fault for being in his territory. During the investigation, it was pointed out to me that I may have come too close to a mama with her babies, or a stash fresh kill. I had cat hair on my clothes because I have cats at home. The smell may have attracted it. I was being quiet. Hikers could be noisy to ward off predators. I'm a small person, good for a quick snack. People should pretend to be bigger than they are to discourage predators. I was walking slowly. I should have walked faster, as though I had a purpose, but never jog or run. My hat was red. I could have been mistaken for wounded prey. I was given 14 points that could have caused the attack. After 3 surgeries and lots of healing, I still go camping alone, but I drive an hour in the opposite direction to another forest. I intermittently am one of those annoying people who plays their music too loud for a couple of songs and always carry bear spray. That was 2.5 years ago. I'm up to 101 pounds, and am better mentally and physically. I come a long way in healing and have more to go. I'm no longer ashamed of the scars. The emo hair hides my face. A Lakota medicine man offered to use ceremonial pigment to permanently tattoo the long scratches down my arm, to which I declined. All that, and it wasn't even a Bigfoot. Learn from my mistakes and stay safe. Number 4. Delta. I'll start out with a little backstory. I became medically disabled in the Army in 2015. I served the rest of my time creating a private security team called SE-146 while I was in the reserve component. My name is Delta. I reside in Arizona and am getting ready to retire SC-146 operations, being that I am starting a family next year. Fast forward to 2019. My partner Guardian 06 and I were hiking in the woods off the Rio Verde Winter in a recreation site. The park looks like it's a location for one of those cliche thrillers. Trees loom over the pathways, nearly blocking out the moon, and vegetation is so thick that light won't pass through, let alone a person, if they needed to hustle through for any reason. Let me be the first to tell you that there are many of those reasons to want to run off the trail into the tree line. 06 and I were walking the trail at approximately 2 a.m. on a Monday. The air was crisp, and it felt good to have the occasional cool breeze in the fall. The trail winds around only 150 meters before ending, but it was our first time out, and it seemed indefinite. As we rounded one of the long curves, we heard some loud movement in the trees. We quickly crouched down and went dead silent. Suddenly, my heart let through my skin as we heard what sounded like a woman in distress being raped and screaming. We slowly encroached on the sound and came to a parking lot. We scanned the asphalt and the trees, and no one was around. There were no vehicles and no movement. We got in the car and left hurriedly towards the classic midnight snack joint, McDonald's. 6 months later, 06 and I were back on the trail. This time we came from the Screamer Trailhead, as we affectionately call it. As we finished up the trail, we noticed a gray Mustang drive up fast, and we quickly dove into the trees and started crawling under the canopy. 2 men got out and were speaking Spanish while they opened the trunk. To my astonishment, they grabbed a large black bag and hauled away what I can only describe as an adult-sized human cadaver into Screamer Trail. We've been to that river dozens of times on operation. We've been shot at. We've heard trees knock as if it was Sasquatch moving around. We've been hunted by mountain lions. A myriad of insane activity had gone on there, and the craziest thing is that we've hardly ever seen police presence. I'm talking 3 times from 2019 to 2021. Always remember, if you're going to hike the Rio Verde, prepare to get hunted. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. I haven't recorded a new closing in a while. I've been using sort of a stock one, so I thought I would just record a new one and see how everyone was doing. I do hope you like the video. We're getting towards that time of year, that Halloween coming up, so I'm going to try to get some really scary Halloween-themed videos, trick-or-treat themed videos, and maybe some supernatural things as well. Let me know if you have any of those. You can always send them to the address in my description. And also let me know what you want to see. All the cats are doing great, and I hope you're enjoying watching some on the screen right now. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please feel free to hit the subscribe button and the bell to be notified of new videos. Leave me a comment to let me know what you thought of the video, and consider sharing it with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd want narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.